When considering property in the Berkshires, it's a fair question to wonder whether or not it makes more sense to buy a pre-existing home or build the exact property that you are dreaming of. And there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to building to consider that are dependent on the local market that you're looking at. Here in the Berkshires, some of the things to be considering that we're going to get into in this video are things such as land restrictions and uses and conservation, building costs, availability of contractors and how hard it's going to be to get the tradespeople that you're actually going to need in order to accomplish the project that you're working on. We're going to get into all of that in this video and kind of go through some of the pros and cons of whether or not you should build or buy in the Berkshires. I'm Cameron Volastro. I'm a real estate professional here in Berkshire County, and if you're looking for property here, whether you're looking for a pre-existing home or you're looking to identify the perfect piece of land to create that home that you've been dreaming of, whether it's a primary residence or you're looking for a second home to get out of the city, I'd love to connect with you. All of my contact information is in the description. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video if you find some value into it. But without further ado, let's dive right into it. Let's start this out by talking about some of the costs associated with building. Some of them are much more obvious than others, such as what the cost per square foot is going to be or what the land price is going to be. And then there are some more hidden costs associated with the process of building homes, particularly in the Berkshires. So starting out with what we're seeing for price per square foot, I have relationships with a lot of luxury builders in the area, and I've been talking with some of them recently about where their projects have been landing. And mind you, these are the builders who are creating homes that are anywhere in the 2 million to, sometimes over $10 million for the total project costs. But they're very often seeing the price per square foot at the end of the day landing somewhere between $700 a square foot and $900 a square foot would be considered typical when looking at luxury home builds. When getting into more traditional home builds, we are still seeing building prices in the sub $500 range. And these numbers are coming from some of my lending partners who are giving out money for people to build their homes here. They're often lending based on a projection between $400 and $500 a square foot for a more traditional style home. And this is still going to be a nice home that you're going to build. It's just a little bit different of a ballpark than the luxury builds where we're getting into much higher end materials and much more attention to detail and the finer things that really separate a luxury property from a more traditional home. Of course, those are just benchmarks, and you can certainly go well beyond $1,000 a square foot in a build. And if you're really price conscious, you might be able to figure out how to get on even under $400 a square foot, though I do think that you'll probably find it challenging to get there. The next facet to consider is the price that you're going to be willing to pay for the land that you're actually going to build the house on. And we have a huge variety of price points when it comes to that parcel that you're looking for. A lot of this is going to be determined by what lifestyle you're looking to achieve, and that's probably the first thing that you should consider when thinking about building or buying in the Berkshires is what is it that you're after here? Are you looking for something that's walk to town? Do you want something that's in a suburb in Pittsfield? Do you want to be very isolated out in like Beckett, Otis, Tyringham? You want to feel like you're off on your own a little bit. All of these different lifestyles are going to come at a different price point. And just to give you a bit of a basis, I have a property listed in Pittsfield. It's a building lot off of Crane Ave in Pittsfield. It's pretty well located centrally for right around $70,000. And the land out in Beckett, where you're getting a bit more isolated and you're getting a little bit further from everything, we see building lots out there sometimes with multiple acres starting at $20,000 or $30,000. So you can get a pretty good chunk of land there for a pretty good value. And then as you move into some of the more like central locations of southern Berkshire County, where you're going to have that like art and culture lifestyle at your fingertips in every direction that you go, we see pieces of land sometimes passing $1 million when you're looking at a tract of land that might be over 100 acres and is 5 minutes from Tanglewood, downtown Stockbridge, downtown Lenox. You got Great Barrington in reach, and there's a premium for having all of those things at your fingertips. So we can definitely work with just about any budget when it comes to identifying the tract of land that you want to put your house on. And once again, just really consider the lifestyle you're after, and we can narrow down like what budget is going to be reasonable to achieve the access to whatever amenities that you're looking for and the amount of land that you desire, and figure out a strategy to get you within a reasonable price point that makes sense for you and your project. Now, let's get into some of the less obvious things that you're going to need to allocate funds for when building a house. For starters, if you're looking at property that has not been cleared for a building site, you're going to need to allocate funds to cut down trees and open up a build site on that piece of land. And the cost for this can add up surprisingly quickly. Cutting a driveway into a property is going to cost money. The further you build away from the road, the more it's going to cost you to set up your utilities, such as your electrical, and if there's sewer on street. And if there's not sewer on street, you need to be allocating funds for building a septic system, building a well if there's not water on street. If there is water on street, once again, you're looking at the further you build away from the road, the more money you're going to be paying to hook up to those public utilities and take advantage of that. Also, considering what the earth you're building on actually consists of can make a huge difference in what it's going to cost to excavate and get ready to pour your foundation. So if you buy a piece of land that's on ledge, for example, you're going to have to blast the rock out of the way so that you can actually pour your foundation. And that's going to be significantly more expensive than if you're able to just dig a hole and pour the foundation on a different track that is a less complicated ground material to work with. Another consideration with property is if you purchase a piece of property where you have to deal with conservation and you need more engineering work, this can add up quickly as well. If you're trying to build in a way where you're encroaching on wetlands, for example, not only is it expensive to do the engineering work and to work through that type of process, it might altogether just not be possible. So having a pulse to all of these different facets and making sure you have a very good understanding of the challenges you're going to face with a particular piece of land is going to be very important for making a informed decision in purchasing that property and moving forward, and having an understanding of how much you're ultimately going to invest in building your house, from land acquisition to utilities to building costs, etc. There's a lot of moving parts to factor into that equation to make sure you are able to anticipate the costs. Now let's talk a little bit about building timelines and identifying builders and whatnot. If you've been around this channel for a little while now, you've probably heard me say in the past that it can be very challenging to find tradespeople and builders and all of the people that you're going to need in order to accomplish a project like this start to finish. And luckily, things have really shifted at this point. During COVID, it was much more challenging to get the tradespeople you were going to need. But at this point, a lot of the pressures on the tradespeople have alleviated to some level at least, and it's much easier now to get access to the people that you're going to need to accomplish these projects. I have very good relationships with some of the luxury builders. I'm happy to connect you with people. I also have interior designers and architects, and anyone you're going to need. If you choose to connect and work with me, I will help you get in touch with the right people. It's worth considering too, when getting in touch with these people, their individual timelines as well, because some of the most respected builders are going to have a little bit more of a wait list, though it's not typically going to be like 2 or 3 years like it was for a while, as opposed to some of the other builders who are still very good that might be able to start your project within a few months right now. Let's touch briefly on some of the pros and cons of building versus just buying something pre-existing versus buying something that you're going to renovate. One of the first things you should really consider here is how particular of a style of home that you're looking for and how willing you are to compromise on what your vision might be within whatever your price point might be. I do often find myself working with a luxury buyer who may be after something that is more of like a modern contemporary style home and has some very particular needs in terms of the living space that they're looking for. And very quickly, when I work with these people, they come to the realization that they're not very likely to find the exact thing that they're looking for here because we have a lot of inventory and homes here that are more outdated. So if you have a need for control of an exact thing that you're looking for, it might make more sense to lean towards building and getting the exact thing that you're dreaming of. That said, building is more often than not going to be significantly more expensive than buying something pre-existing or renovating something pre-existing in a lot of cases. And renovations is a bit more nuanced because that's going to depend greatly on the project you're looking at of whether or not it makes more sense to build from the ground up or to go into renovating a house and making something pre-existing into what you're looking for. Another pro of building is the newer homes are typically going to be much more efficient than an older home. So if you are conscious of what your electric bills are going to look like and you're conscious of the environment and you want to have something that's a bit more green, building might make a lot of sense because you can add a piece of housing inventory into the area that is maybe even carbon neutral. And once again, I can help you identify people that specialize in those types of projects. Also, if you want something low maintenance, if you build a house from the ground up and everything's brand new, ideally, at least with a brand new house, you're going to have less problems. That doesn't always work out to be the case from what I hear from people who build houses, but if you work with a quality builder, that should be a reasonable expectation. Some of the cons of building and why it might make sense to look towards something that's pre-existing is the overall timeline can often well exceed what people think they're getting into because you're looking at the time it takes to acquire the land, which maybe you spend a couple months looking for land, you get the land, and then you need to line up the builders. And by the time you're breaking ground, maybe you're 6 months in already. And then it might be another 12 plus months to go from pouring the foundation to actually putting the finishing touches on the house and moving in. And overall, that year and a half timeline that I just laid out might be more on the efficient side of what a reasonable expectation is with building. So if you're looking to get into a property and enjoy it sooner, it really might make sense to try to identify something that is close enough and make some changes to make it into what you want, because you might really cut down that timeline of when you're actually moving your things into that house. The next thing to consider is when building a house, it's very common that the budget creeps beyond what you initially were expecting and signing up for. And this can happen very quickly and easily when, especially when you start making changes, when you're partway along the building process and you start changing those initial contracts. And it's very typical that people find themselves in a position where they feel that to be necessary. And really quickly, you can find yourself 20, 30+% beyond what you had projected your project to cost. Budget creep is certainly something to keep in mind and something to factor into your consideration of build or buy. Staying on that topic of budget, the price per square foot for luxury homes, for example, is going to be very different when you consider what it is to build something brand new versus to buy existing. There's a huge range of price per square foot when it comes to what you'd consider a luxury home in the Berkshires, or even just for a regular home, where in Pittsfield, we'll see prices often around $200 a square foot. To other areas that are more desirable in South County, for example, we'll see homes trade for, $800-900 a square foot in some cases, sometimes even breaching that $1,000 price point. But typically, in 99 out of 100 cases, when comparing the price per square foot that you're going to build something for compared to buying something pre-existing, you're going to get a lot more value out of something that you buy that's pre-existing, when comparing apples to apples there. Now, if unique character is something that you like, there's a lot to be said for the pre-existing homes here because we are lucky enough to have a lot of historic homes in the Berkshires. So if that's something you like, that's even more of a reason to consider sticking with the pre-existing homes, because you can do a lot of really cool things with an older home to renovate and bring in some of these modern amenities that are probably very important to you and your lifestyle, all while still respecting the original character of that home and keeping those original details that we really can't replicate in a lot of cases now because craftsmanship was so different 100+ years ago. Now, most of you, when looking at property, are concerned with how that property is going to fare as an investment for you. And now this is another reason why you might consider buying a pre-existing home, because typically a pre-existing home over a long period of time is going to realize some level of appreciation and prove to be a pretty good investment in the long term. That is a bit more difficult to say for construction or building a dream house in the Berkshires, especially when we look at some of the super luxury properties here. For example, there's a property in Stockbridge that could be purchased around $10 million right now. And that home, to build it, had to be in the 30 to 40 million range. And I'm just spitballing here, but there's like at least $5 million just in stone walls on the property. So it's really remarkable. If you're building something that is over the top, super luxury, you should be doing that just because you want to and because you're after that particular thing. But just be realistic with yourself about how that's going to fare as an investment, because it's very easy to get carried away and find yourself in a position where recouping that initial investment is going to essentially be impossible. I've seen this in many cases. Another property I toured, the seller told me he had 13 million into it, and he ultimately would be lucky to realize about 5 million back on that property in the current market, which is still, a good sum of money, but that's a pretty substantial loss to realize on a piece of real estate. So overall, there's a lot to consider here when you're weighing the pros and cons of building or buying pre-existing in the Berkshires. I think very often buying something pre-existing and renovating is going to be a logical approach when it comes to the amount of dollars you're going to invest and the amount of value you're going to get out. But that's not going to be true for everybody. And if you're after something really particular and you have the timeline to allot for building that particular house and the patience, there is certainly the opportunity to create whatever that dream property is for you here, and I'm happy to help you tackle that challenge. That said, if I've not answered all of your questions in this video, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. All of my contact information is in the description, and I look forward to speaking with anybody about any other questions they might have when it comes to building or buying in the Berkshires. Please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I will see ya.